Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. Sorry for the late one today. I woke up late. I was up late, kind of memorializing my dad. You know, yesterday would have been my dad's 82nd birthday, and I took it a little harder than I wanted to, meaning that a lot of memories flowed through. And my dad was the one that ignited the passion that started me down the path of the 2A. I remember going hunting with my dad. I remember going shooting with my dad. I remember the first time my dad ever took me out shooting. You know, the first time I ever went shooting, Dad had just bought his first rifle after starting a new family. So my dad had been married once before, and he married my mom and got me as a bonus because my mom already had me. My real father found out I was coming, and after my mom and him were married for a year and left. So my dad got me when I was 3 or 4 years old. And his first rifle, I'll never forget it, was a stainless steel Mini 14 with a regular stock. It's not the cool 18 one. But I'll never forget him taking me out and shooting for the first time. So Dad took a watermelon, and, you know, I was like 5 or 6 by this time because we were kind of dirt poor, and Dad had been scrimping and saving because, well, he took care of the family. And we had, you know, I had my older brothers, Rick and Ron, and then my little sister, Cassie. My little sister passed away in 2017. So it's been a while. And then Mom and Dad passed away. But Dad ignited this passion. He was an outdoorsman, an avid outdoorsman. Just hunting and fishing, though. He didn't, he wasn't into hiking and all that other stuff other than hiking like forever when we hunted. But the first time shooting, Dad took me out. He took a watermelon, and he put it out at about 5 or 6 yards, and he shot it with that Mini 14, and it just disintegrated. And Dad said, if you're not careful, that's you. So he was instantly trying to show me that this was not a toy. I kind of had something similar. I did something similar with my kids when I adopted them because it was enough of a shock. You know, if you're getting into this thing, you need to know very carefully that this is not a toy, right? Well, Dad did that. And he showed me pretty eloquently, I should say, that this is not a toy. But then he shot, and back then we didn't use hearing protection like we should. I paid for that later. But I remember Dad, after firing a couple rounds, he pulls me close to him and he holds the gun up for me, holds it up to my shoulder, and he says, look through the scope. And I look through the scope, and he goes, now, reach where my hand is, follow me, and you're gonna shoot it yourself now. And I go, okay, Dad. And I reached down, and I squeezed the trigger like Dad told me to, and the gun went off. And I went, wow, that's cool. And I don't remember hitting the target. I don't remember doing anything because I could barely see out of the scope, because I couldn't figure out where your eye relief is, and that what I now know is called eye relief. But back then, I just remember looking through the black tube and seeing the X and going, holy crap, this is awesome. And then that started the fire, Fast forward a little bit longer, my brother Rick, he got a Remington Nylon 22 that he gave me. And I was hunting with them, rabbit hunting with Rick and Ron and Dad. And we spent a lot of time out in the woods, just doing our thing because, well, that was recreation for us, and it was cheap recreation as far as Dad and Rick and Ron were concerned. We just needed gas money and a couple boxes of shells. Back then you could get them at 7-Eleven or 7-Eleven, and they were like 25 cents or 50 cents a box of 50. And one box was what I was given. And my brothers would get a box for each of them, if not a couple. And we'd go out, spend the day hunting rabbits, hunting coyotes, hunting whatever we wanted, whatever crawled its butt across the New Mexico dirt. Fast forward a little farther, and I was 9 years old, 8 or 9, when Dad bought me my first hunting rifle. And my first hunting rifle was a 7mm Mauser, a Spanish 7mm Mauser. I wish I would have kept the damn thing, because it's the only damn gun I've ever had, only 7mm, well, until now, that it kept its headspace. Like, the brass wouldn't wear out on it. So, sorry, I'm really congested this morning. That's another reason why this is a little bit later. And Dad, later on, I hunted with that for a year, and the thing looked like dog meat. And it was sporterized already, so it wasn't a full military Spanish 7mm Mauser. My brothers helped me sand it, basically, and refinish the stock. Dad did too, because he shortened it for me so I could hold it, being 8 or 9 years old, kind of like the first version of a youth rifle before there was a youth rifle. And we stripped the paint that was on the stock, not the stock, the barrel, and the barreled action, because it was painted and it looked horrible. We didn't have a lot of money, so my brothers helped me repaint it, and we painted it solid matte black, and it looked pretty damn good when we were done with it. Didn't have a scope or nothing, but I hunted with it the first year and learned some lessons. I remember my Uncle Phil, I was a dumbass and got out of his truck, and I bolted my rifle, and I didn't put it on safety right away. And when I did that, I put my finger in the trigger guard, and my Uncle Phil tuned me up. And not physically, he just let me know that that's not what the hell you do with a loaded rifle. But that's the learning stuff, 8 or 9 years old, and you don't always pay a damn good attention, and you should, especially when you're messing with something this dangerous. The next year, my dad found a German 8mm Mauser, and I still have it. It's been converted to an 8mm .6, but which means that it's been rechambered, so it's got a 30-06 brass chamber, but an 8mm bore. So I neck up a 30-06 brass to a 32 caliber or 323 caliber 8mm bullet, and they used to call that the poor man's Magnum. That was a big thing with my dad, and I have my dad's 8mm .6 too, because I think I'm the only one that actually knows how to make the rounds in the family anyway. And when my dad passed away, it was something he made sure that I ended up with because of that. And my brothers agreed. But this type of thing kept going on, and we hunted for years in Carson Forest, the Arkansas Loop, just south, I would say more east of it. Harts Canyon. We hunted in La Plata, like what we call La Plata, but it's still northwest New Mexico. That's where I got my first deer. I remember my first deer, my dad rubbing blood on my face. We didn't drink it. Dad made me wear the blood back to camp. He dipped his hands in the blood, put it on my face, and made me go back to camp. And then I was allowed to clean it off. That day, they all ate liver and onions. I can't stand liver and onions. They had deer liver and onions. That was tradition. The next year I made my dad go get the liver, because if he wanted it, he decided not to. Instead, we had backstrap that year. But this passion for the 2A continued. I eventually bought my own first rifle that I paid for, and it was a full military K98. Got in a tight and ended up having to sell it. But I bought another one because, I have one. Now my collection's not bad. There's probably about 50 or so in there. I'm not kept track. But I really got into tactical rifles. There was a point in time I got into a Mini 14 again because it reminded me of Dad. And it was just not the same as Dad's. So I ended up getting rid of that. But I got the Kalashnikov was also something that Dad got me into. Dad had some back problems from where he worked. He used to work for the city of Farmington, and he hurt his back on the job. And he ended up getting surgeries because of that, and he got a little bit of a settlement for it. And he gave me a chunk of that settlement, and he said, it's all yours, whatever you want. Well, I ended up buying our Norinco Mac 90 because I wanted a Kalashnikov. And I loved the hell out of that gun. I used it everywhere for a lot of things. Hunting-wise, that is. And my dad and I, well, my mom pawned the damn thing and lost it. But I bought another one. I bought a Romanian Wasser, which I still own to this day. A Wasser 10 Kalashnikov. But that was my first experience with black rifles, was the Kalashnikov. I mean, other than the Mini 14, I don't consider it a black rifle because at the time his was stainless steel, and his had the nice walnut stock or the wood stock. I'm pretty sure it was walnut back then. And my Mini 14 I got after my Kalashnikov passion started. And that's probably why the Mini 14 just didn't stack up, is it didn't have the power that I was used to for that intermediate cartridge. And it just didn't have the fun factor. You know, the magazines, you had the same rock and lock sort of, but they were kind of flimsy for the Ruger magazines. They've always been that way up until probably more recently, where they had to compete with the AR-15. You know, the AR-15 was that black rifle on the shelf. I remember going to a sporting goods that was across from San Juan Apartments, and it was only there for, 6 or 7 months. And I remember walking in there because they specialized in black rifles. And I remember seeing my first Uzi 9mm. This was right after Terminator came out. And it was the real deal. It had the giggle switch, the whole bit. There was also AR-15s, well, M16s that were on the shelf, and you could buy them back then. This was before 1986, so it's been 1985, 1984, somewhere in there. And I was fascinated by that. They had one Kalashnikov there, and we were dirt poor, like I said, so I didn't get the thing, and I was too young, to be honest, back then. Dad sparked this passion that has continued on. He got me into reloading, got me into long-range shooting. My fundamentals for long-range shooting seems to be pretty set because I've taught a lot of people how to shoot nowadays, and they all seem to do better after going out with me. And that's not me tooting my horn, because I don't consider myself an expert in very many things, if anything, because every time I've ever known someone to pipe up and say they're an expert, they've been proven wrong. And, I've gotten some facts and stuff wrong here, and I know that because, well, I'm human. And the research I do for this has to do with the political stuff more so than the gun stuff. I kind of rely on the things I know already about the 2A when we're talking about some guns. So I appreciate you guys correcting me when I'm wrong, because I learned stuff. And that's what I've always loved about the 2A, is that I've learned stuff from everyone I've ever met in the 2A. I've learned from my Uncle Phil how to make kick-ass reloads. I learned from my dad. My dad learned from my Uncle Phil. And my brothers learned from all of us. To this day, I have my oldest brother, who is one that should be right where I am in the 2A, meaning he should know everything I do. And there are times he's asked for help with certain things, and I've had to tell him this or that, or different things about the AR-15. And it's just because that wasn't his primary drive. I mean, he's always been a hunter, a trapper type person, but he's been more into archery most of his life. And helping my brothers has always been helpful to me, because it lets me know that Dad did teach me something, and I'm sure he taught them that, but the lesson didn't stick, and it stuck with me. The AR-15 was not my dad's favorite gun. In fact, he kind of hated them because of the stories from Vietnam. All of his friends that use them. Those horrible stories of the guns jamming and stuck with Dad. And up until Dad passed, he was not a big fan of them. After he passed, or right before he passed, I had built my brother an AR-10 so I could trade that AR-10 for my dad's M1 Garand. Now, my dad got in a tight, didn't tell me, but he told my brother Ronnie, and he sold sold his M1 Garand to Ron, and Ron had been holding it, and Ron doesn't like it because it weighs damn near 10 pounds, and he wasn't going to hunt with it or shoot with it because it's so damn heavy, and, he not a real big fan of the .6 either. So I traded traded this AR-10 I built for Ronnie so I could get Dad's M1 Garand. Dad's M1 Garand is still in my safe, and it is one of my most prized possessions. And that is what I hope you all have, some of those connections to the 2A, some of those, I talk about nostalgia all the time on here. That's what this is to me. It's nostalgia and history. I never thought I was a history buff until I had kids, and they're the ones that told me that I was indeed a history buff. And I would hear the stories, I would tell them or recount the stories and realize that they were coming from Dad. Those history lessons you learn. Dad was a huge history buff. Dad barely graduated high school, I think, but he was a huge fan of American history, specifically World War II history. But Dad always saw things through the focus of the 2A. So I learned about the guns of World War II as I learned about the history of what they did. Like, I knew what the Allies carried. I knew what the Axis carried. And for some reason, I always seemed to be drawn to the Axis guns, and I think that was because Dad had an 8mm Mauser. And that was a real piece of American history, of World War II history, that we could hold in our hands. It had the Waffenamt on it, and I traced it down in a Mauser book and found out that it was actually made in 1942, and that it was, it's sitting in my collection. It is that 8mm .6. Dad eventually got to the point where the 8mm Mauser wasn't going to do it for him for range, and he decided to take it down to Phil Ross. The guy used to live here when he was alive, owned Ross's Sporting Goods downtown. And Phil Ross had the equipment and the know-how and just reamed the chamber for him and made him an 8mm .6. That's who made mine. Well, actually, the gunsmith that took over for Bill when he retired made mine, named Tim Ware. But those ties to the 2A, those are a lot of the things I was thinking about yesterday. Yesterday I picked up a couple of Dad's rifles that I hadn't held in a while. And as I get ready to go on a hunt, this Thursday I'm going to be gone. I'll be going out for my first bow hunt. And I'm using what one of my friends likes to call a trad bow, so I'm using a recurve. But there's a story behind that too. My dad, before he passed, had said that he wanted if he was going to ever hunt archery, he'd use a recurve. And he regretted not being able to hunt with Rick and with Ronnie in their chosen field, like what they are good at. My brothers have always been archers, and they've always been really good compared to me. Now, I've gotten good enough to where I feel I can hunt, but I don't honestly feel like I want to hunt more anymore. I'll continue doing this stuff because my middle son seems to be very interested in this, so I hope to pass on some of those lessons Dad taught me, like how to track, how to walk, how you keep track of where you are so you don't lose yourself in the woods, especially in Carson National Forest. But I hope you guys all have some of those connections to the 2A that in all this world that we have, what drives your passion for the 2A. Because it's under consistent assault all the time. And you have to have some connection, otherwise, why are you doing it? other than it's your right. But why are you doing it? That's why I get so adamant about the 2A, is that there's a familial connection to me with this. These people that want to take your right away, they don't understand how ingrained this is in me. This is part of me because it reminds me of my dad, my uncles, and it's been in my family, part of our family, since I've been around, since I was like 4 years old, literally. I remember these stories, the stories we made as we hunted. And I'll be damned if I'm giving this up because of some idiot leftist who doesn't understand that the gun is just a tool. It's just a piece of wood, piece of steel, maybe some polymer. It's an inanimate object. Without having a mind backing it to guide what it's doing, it won't do anything. I mean, when you look at any other tool, a wrench, there are people that have been killed with wrenches too. And then they say, well, it's not a ton of people that are killed at one time with a wrench. Well, does it really matter whether it's 1 or 20 or 30 when we know damn good and well what the problem is? This is why I like Vivek, is he actually was the first political candidate I have ever heard 100% put it on the mental health issue we have. And that one of the solutions he suggested was that we actually take the bad people away and put them in institutions of some kind. It's a hard thing to swallow, a hard pill to swallow, but it's the truth. If they're that mentally unstable, they don't need to be in society. We shouldn't be having to fight these battles and make it a political thing with the 2A, but it seems to be what our opponents want. And I say opponents, I use the term leftist as a generic term. I actually mean anyone who's wanting to go after the 2A. Whether they're on, quote, unquote, our side or they're on the opposite side. When they're willing to compromise on this, they're wrong. Because compromise has got us exactly where we are. Every time one of these horrible incidents have happened, and another shooting happened, I think, yesterday, or day before yesterday, where a Nazi went into a Dollar General and shot 3 people, and they were black. And his guns had swastikas on them and Nazi memorabilia type stuff printed or scrolled on them. And he was a devout racist. And the left instantly started demonizing the gun, which was an AR-15 and a Glock pistol, I believe, and saying that this is what happens because of the gun. No, it's what happens because of hate. It's what happens when mentally unwell people do stuff. And, we still have not focused on that. You keep focusing on the one tool or the tool, and that's not the problem. Because if you have hate in your heart, and if you're angry and you're pissed off and you're mentally unstable, you'll find a way, one way or another, if you're determined to do something like that, to do it. And that has always driven me nuts, that we see these people that are willing to compromise. These FUDs, you don't need an AR-15 to hunt. It's not about hunting, you jackass. It's about your rights. The simple fact is, the reason why they haven't went door to door to take them is they know they can't. Nor do they think that would be politically expedient, because it would burn their political capital. Because if they're willing to disarm you, if you look at any example in history, before bad stuff happens to any group of people, they disarm the populace. The Nazis did it. Mao did it. Stalin did it. They've all disarmed the people before bad things happen to them. And, there's 100 million people that have vanished, I believe, from that type of action. I pray that Americans learn those lessons and keep that to heart. Like, share, subscribe, be great.